It started as something ordinary. Every evening, I drove the same route, past the same strip of lights, to the same McDonald's. The hum of the fluorescent signs, the faint smell of fries drifting through the parking lot, it was almost comforting. My car's engine thrummed a steady rhythm beneath me, and for a moment, I felt the world outside dissolve into quiet repetition. I wasn't in a rush. I never was. I liked the ritual. Pull up to the speaker, hear the voice, place my order, wait a few minutes, and leave. That small ritual had become the punctuation in my otherwise monotonous evenings. The drive-through lanes smelled faintly of asphalt warmed by day, and the oily perfume of fried food. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, noticing the cold vinyl texture beneath my fingers, the subtle vibration of the engine. I could hear the faint click of a bird outside the window, maybe a crow settling somewhere on the roof of the building. The world seemed ordinary, predictable, safe. I repeated the same order every night. A burger, fries, a soda, sometimes a shake. Nothing unusual, nothing new. I ate mechanically, sometimes not even hungry, just because it felt right to continue the pattern. The speaker crackled faintly as I approached, the small mechanical pause before the voice came alive. I had heard it so often it was almost like a companion, a neutral presence, a part of my evening ritual. I said my usual words, expecting the usual response. And for a while, everything was normal. The voice repeated my order, the monotony comforting. I could feel the warmth of the car heater against my hands, the low rumble in my chest from the engine, the smell of the fries creeping through the air vent. My mind wandered lazily. The day, trivial worries, memories of school or work that had no real weight anymore. Then I paused. Something caught the corner of my awareness. The voice felt different. Not in tone, not in timbre, but in awareness. I told myself I was imagining it. My mind liked patterns, and when patterns shift slightly, it always feels like something more. I shook my head. Maybe I was just tired. It had been a long day. Maybe the voice had always been this precise, and I had never noticed. I reminded myself of the safety in repetition, the safety in knowing every step, every smell, every sound. The drive-through lane curved gently. I noticed the small cracks in the asphalt beneath my tires, the subtle shift in the neon lights reflecting off the puddles left from an earlier rain. I inhaled, and the smell of salt, grease, and plastic wrappers filled my nostrils. I thought about nothing and everything all at once. The mundane, the habitual. I didn't know I was about to cross a threshold. It started so quietly that I almost didn't notice. A word, a syllable, a phrase that seemed anticipatory. A subtle understanding in the voice. Not human, but informed. And for a fraction of a second, my stomach tightened, not from hunger, not from disgust, but from recognition. Something new. Something had always known. I rolled down my window and leaned forward. The cold air brushed against my neck. The faint hum of the speaker's electronics, the distant buzz of the neon signs, the low murmur of the parking lot, nothing seemed unusual. And yet, in the subtle pause before the voice spoke again, I felt the first prickling sense of unease, like a quiet warning I wasn't ready to hear. I gave my order, and the voice responded differently. Not with my order exactly, but with a precision I had never noticed before. It knew, somehow, exactly how much I'd already eaten tonight. I laughed softly to myself, nervous. A trick of sound, a coincidence, nothing more. I adjusted the mirror, noticed the reflection of the streetlights bouncing off the dashboard. Everything was normal. My car, my hands, the smell of fries, the cool air on my neck. Normal. Safe. But the voice, it wasn't ordinary anymore. The next night, I drove the same route. The sky was heavy, a low cloud cover reflecting the streetlights back like a pale, wet ceiling. The air smelled faintly of rain on asphalt. My tires crunched over the tiny stones along the drive-through lane. I could feel every vibration in the steering wheel, each subtle imperfection in the road. My senses felt unusually sharp, tuned into the small details I normally ignored. The speaker crackled as I approached, the familiar prelude. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was imagining things. And then it happened again. The voice, calm and even, said, "Do you want the usual?" I paused. That was normal, wasn't it? I had heard it many times. But there was an undertone, a rhythm in the phrasing that felt anticipatory. Too knowing. I repeated my usual order. Yes. The burger, fries, and a soda. My hands gripped the wheel a little tighter, my stomach tightening not from hunger but from an unplaceable sensation. A trace of unease. "Already had 2 today," the voice replied. I laughed lightly, trying to dismiss it. Yeah. Sure. Let's just do the usual." But the words lingered. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, checking the empty lot behind me. The neon light above the restaurant flickered faintly, casting uneven shadows across my dashboard. The smell of oil and salt, so familiar, was suddenly almost cloying. My throat tightened as I realized I was breathing a little faster than normal. I drove forward slowly, waiting for my food, listening to the faint hiss of the drive-thru speakers and the soft hum of the lights. Every small sound felt exaggerated. The flick of a fly's wing against the glass, the faint thump of a sign swinging in the wind outside, the creak of my seat as I shifted slightly. The world seemed still, too still, like it was holding its breath. And then I noticed the tray through the window. It was as usual, perfectly arranged. Fries in a neat paper bag, burger wrapped in its usual wrapper, soda cup sweating condensation against the tray. Nothing had changed. Everything looked normal. But my stomach tightened again. I felt the first tendrils of doubt creeping in. The voice had said something it shouldn't have known. Something only I knew. And I tried to explain it away. Perhaps it was a system, a record of orders, something digital, impersonal. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, anticipating, waiting. I drove home slowly, noticing every reflection in the car's windows, the dull gleam of streetlights bouncing off wet asphalt, the distant hum of tires on the empty road. The world outside seemed unchanged, familiar, safe, routine. But the memory of that voice echoed inside my mind, subtle and precise, like a word repeated over and over in the back of my skull. That night, I lay awake, hearing the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft whistle of the wind outside. My body felt tight, tense. Every sound in the apartment seemed magnified. A tap on the window, a creak in the floorboards, the soft hiss of the heating vent. My thoughts circled back to the drive-thru, to the words, to the knowledge it had shown. And I told myself, it's nothing. Just coincidence, routine, a trick of the mind. Tomorrow I would go back. I would eat as usual. The world was safe. But when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the voice. Calm, precise, waiting. The next evening, I found myself driving down the same streets again. The lights reflected off the wet asphalt in long, orange streaks, blurring slightly as the windshield wipers swept rhythmically. I felt the familiar tension in my shoulders, a tiny weight pressing down as I maneuvered into the drive-thru lane. My hands rested on the wheel, but they weren't steady. There was a subtle tremor I couldn't ignore. The speaker crackled. I braced myself. Evening, the voice said. Calm, precise, familiar. I swallowed. My throat felt dry, as if I hadn't swallowed in hours. Evening, I replied, forcing normality into my tone. 2 burgers and a fry, it asked. My pulse quickened. It wasn't just a guess. It was accurate. I hadn't even ordered yet. My mind raced. Coincidence. Statistical probability. Pattern recognition. It didn't matter. The words settled in my stomach like ice. Yes, I said, my voice quieter than intended. Yes, that's right. Would you like a drink? I nodded automatically, though I could feel my hands trembling slightly. Yes, sure. The usual. The tray appeared through the window moments later, perfectly assembled, just like always. But now I noticed small details I hadn't before, the slight smear on the wrapper, the fries that seemed to have settled in a pattern, the soda lid aligned almost unnaturally straight. I looked away, then back, and the arrangement hadn't changed. It was the same. Identical. I drove home slowly, each turn measured, each brake soft and careful. The world outside seemed normal. Street lights flickered, distant tires hummed, a car door slammed somewhere blocks away. But inside my mind, the voice kept repeating. It knew. It always knew. That night, I found myself standing in front of the refrigerator, opening it and closing it without thinking. My stomach ached slightly, though I hadn't eaten more than usual. I wondered, idly, if it had something to do with my body's rhythm, my habits, my weakness for routine. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the edge of the counter. The hum of the fridge sounded unnaturally loud. The floorboards beneath me creaked in patterns that made my mind jump for no reason. I kept thinking about the drive-thru, about the accuracy, about the timing, about the voice. Every night I went, it repeated the knowledge of my eating habits, and every night I tried to tell myself it was nothing. But each repetition felt heavier, like a stone added to a pile that was already too high to carry. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began noticing small things at home. My coffee cup shifted slightly between uses, though I had placed it in exactly the same spot. My keys sometimes weren't where I had left them. My phone screen would light up with notifications I hadn't seen, numbers that made no sense. I felt a tension in my chest, a low, constant hum of dread that I couldn't explain. I tried to eat normally, tried to convince myself that tomorrow would be just like any other day. But when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the voice. Calm, precise, knowing. Waiting. It had learned my pattern. It knew what I had already eaten. It knew how I would respond. And I felt it, somehow, leaning into my routine, pressing against it, like an invisible weight that would not lift. I sat in my car that night, long after the drive-thru had disappeared behind the corner. The dashboard lights glowed faintly, casting pale lines across my hands and the gear shift. The air smelled faintly of coffee and car upholstery, warm and slightly stale, and my mind refused to settle. I kept turning the events over and over in my head. It's just coincidence. It's just habit. My own brain predicting patterns. I tried to reason, to calm the faint tremor in my chest. But the logic felt hollow. I thought about the burgers, the fries, the way the voice had stated exactly what I'd eaten before I even spoke. I recalled every drive-thru visit, every order, every routine, the way I paused before ordering, the exact way I pressed the buttons on the dashboard, the small rhythm I followed without noticing. Patterns. Patterns everywhere. I'm imagining it. But imagining didn't explain the way my pulse quickened at the very memory of the voice, calm and unchanging. The way my hands felt heavy and warm, almost damp, as though the knowledge had seeped into my skin. I felt my stomach twist, a mild sickness, and yet I found myself craving the exact meals I had just eaten. I went inside my apartment, the quiet pressing against me. Every tick of the clock sounded amplified. The hum of the refrigerator felt oppressive. I touched the counters and the edges of the furniture, noting the slight chill in the surfaces, the way shadows pooled in the corners. I felt watched, not by a person, not by a shape, but by the memory of that voice, by its precise knowledge of me. I sat at the kitchen table and traced the edge with a finger, thinking about routine, about habits, about how predictable I must be. I tried to imagine that the drive-thru was random, a simple machine reading patterns. But the more I thought, the more my memories of the past weeks pressed back, like small fingers pushing against my ribs. Maybe it's my own memory playing tricks. Maybe I've been unconsciously telling them everything. Maybe it's just numbers, statistics, a coincidence. I closed my eyes and pictured the speaker, the small black box on the other side of the window. It was silent, yet I could hear it perfectly. Calm, precise. It knows. It knows. I tried to distract myself. Television, music, scrolling on my phone. But the images blurred, and the sound of my own breathing became too loud. Every notification felt like a hint, every shadow in my peripheral vision like a whisper. I started counting things obsessively. The number of bites, the number of fries, the number of sips from my soda. I compared them to my memory. Always accurate, always precise. Sleep came reluctantly that night. My pillow was warm and heavy beneath my head, and the blanket felt unusually tight around my chest. I dreamed of the drive-thru, of the speaker, of the calm voice reciting every bite, every fry, every sip, every crumb. I woke multiple times, heart racing, only to find the room silent, the air still, the darkness solid. But the sense of observation lingered, like a thin layer of frost across my mind. By morning, I couldn't remember exactly what had happened during the night, only the certainty that the voice would know, the voice would always know. Even in the small, ordinary moments, pouring cereal, brushing teeth, running water, the memory of that voice pressed against my consciousness. I felt small, predictable, a pattern in the world that had been observed and catalogued. I wondered how long I could maintain this, how long I could pretend that routine was just habit, that coincidence explained it all. And somewhere, deep in the background of my thoughts, I knew that the next visit would come, and it would know everything once again. The next evening, I found myself back in the car, headlights cutting through the wet street. Rain had begun earlier, and the windshield wipers moved with a steady rhythm, a soft swish that filled the otherwise silent cabin. I had planned not to go, to avoid the place, to ignore the voice and the pattern. But something in me, a quiet insistence, pushed me forward. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. My fingers felt clammy, the leather slick beneath my palms. It's just a routine. Nothing more. I'm safe. I'm choosing this. But even as I told myself that, the rationality felt fragile, like paper in the rain. Pulling up to the drive-thru, I noticed the speaker box immediately, small and black, humming faintly. The air smelled of wet asphalt and fried oil, a mix that had become strangely comforting and unnerving at the same time. I breathed in slowly, trying to steady myself, the chill in my chest spreading as I exhaled. The screen flickered slightly, the numbers on the menu shifting in subtle ways. I glanced down at the dashboard clock, then at the menu, then back at the speaker. My stomach twisted, a familiar dull ache, a warning I ignored. It's fine. I've done this before. I'll be fine. I'll have the usual, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause. A soft click, then the calm voice. I see you've had 3 already today. Would you like the extra fries as well? My heart skipped. The recognition, the certainty, pressed in. I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, the extra fries. The car heater hummed, the rain pattered against the windshield, and the speaker offered no judgment, no pause beyond the mechanics of acknowledgement. I felt the ache in my chest deepen, the cold fingers of regret wrapping around me. Yet my hand reached for the window button, slid the glass down, and I repeated the words as if reading a script. Add the extra fries. I watched the speaker light blink, a calm green, and I imagined the voice cataloging every bite, every decision, every small act of indulgence. I imagined it noting the subtle tremor in my hands, the hesitation in my voice, the awareness of how much I had already eaten. And yet, I let it happen. The tray arrived, warm and greasy, the smell thick and familiar. I unwrapped the fries slowly, savoring the heat, the texture, the salt. And yet, a quiet hollow had opened inside me. I knew I was feeding something larger than hunger, something that existed in patterns, in repetition, in observation. I didn't leave immediately. I sat for a few minutes, listening to the rain, watching the wet streets reflect the neon glow of the restaurant sign. The voice had been silent now, yet its presence lingered. The knowledge of my actions, catalogued and expected, pressed into my thoughts like water seeping through cracks in a wall. And as I finally drove away, stomach full, the sense of inevitability wrapped around me. I had chosen this path, quietly, without drama, without resistance, and I knew, even if I didn't want to admit, that it could not be undone. Every bite, every order, every routine step forward had cemented a pattern, and the voice, calm and certain, would always know. The next day, I didn't go to the drive-thru. The streets were quieter, wet from the night rain, and the air smelled faintly of asphalt and something burned, maybe coffee or fries left too long. I parked in my usual spot near the office, and the silence felt heavier than the day before. My stomach twisted, not with hunger, but with anticipation. I knew I would return. I had to. At lunch, I stared at the menu on my phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through the options. I wasn't hungry, not really, but the images, the numbers, the descriptions, the voice of the drive-thru, the memory of it all hovered in the back of my mind. I could almost hear it. Calm, certain, acknowledging every calorie I had consumed, every bite I had taken, every small, quiet indulgence. Even in the office, everything felt catalogued. The pen on my desk, the half-empty water bottle, the way the fluorescent lights flickered above me, everything seemed to observe, to measure. I felt a strange kinship with that voice, and at the same time, an unease I could not name. I moved slowly, deliberately, aware of every motion, aware that each action could be noted, recorded, repeated. That evening, I drove past the familiar golden arches. The neon glow reflected off the wet pavement. The speaker box sat silently, unmoving, waiting. I didn't stop. I didn't even glance at it. But the knowledge, the certainty that it remembered everything, followed me home. I sat in my apartment, the lights dim, the window cracked open just enough for the city sounds to filter in. My hands rested on the table. My stomach wasn't empty, yet I felt the ghost of hunger pressing against me. I thought about the extra fries, the voice's quiet acknowledgement, the cataloging of my choices. And I realized, it wasn't about hunger anymore. It was about inevitability. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I simply waited. And the emptiness grew. Quiet and heavy. It pressed against the walls, filled the corners, wrapped around my chest. The voice didn't speak, but I could feel it, always knowing, always patient, always present. And somewhere in the silence, I understood that it would always know. That every order, every bite, every subtle choice was now permanent. That pattern would not be broken. And that, in itself, was enough. The room stayed dim. The night outside deepened. I sat still, the echo of the drive-thru voice lingering in my mind, calm and certain. And I knew, without doubt, that the voice had no need to speak again. I would always remember. I would always obey. And that realization, quiet and inevitable, filled the space more than any sound could. The last thought drifted, soft and unremarkable, yet it clung. It knows. And then there was only silence.